Welcome to the Filmmaker's Playbook. My name is Jason Branagan and this is a podcast all about filmmaking. On today's show, I talk to creative consultant and filmmaker Des Doyle. Des started his career in the camera department, working on films like Reign of Fire, The Ringer and Ordinary Decent Criminal before making his acclaimed feature-length documentary Showrunners. He also works extensively as an educator and a creative consultant, helping production companies and writers navigate the television marketplace. In our conversation, we discuss how Des got started in the camera department, the genesis of his film Showrunners, why Lost changed the way we think about television, the supportiveness of the Irish film and television community, the challenges facing writers today, and much, much more. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thank you for listening. Des Doyle, thank you for joining me.
Jason Branagan, thank you for asking me.
I'm really looking forward to talking to you. I guess to begin, I know you are a filmmaker and you are a creative consultant. And I was wondering, before we get to the filmmaking side of your career, would you be able to tell me a little bit about your role as a creative consultant and what that entails for you at this moment in time?
It really depends on what a production company or a producer or a writer or whoever the entity is that is looking to work with me is looking for. I kind of fell into this a little bit like as a side effect of doing a number of different courses for writers with Screen Ireland over the years, where inevitably after we'd finished doing whatever it was, writers would approach me and ask me about follow-up questions about stuff or whatever, or would I potentially read something or whatever. And it got to a point where that started to reach quite a volume. And I was like, okay, well, obviously there's some level of interest in people wanting me to do this. And then that kind of evolved into me working one-on-one with some writers. I don't want to say mentoring them because I don't really, I'm not in the business of trying to, inverted commas, teach writers how to write or tell writers how to write or whatever, but it's trying to help them finesse a project or a script or an idea to the point where it becomes more commercially viable, I guess is a way of putting it. But my role would vary. So like sometimes it's like companies want you to come in and consult across a slate that they're working on at the moment. Sometimes there's a specific project that they want to talk to you about, and it can be at all different stages of development. Sometimes it's like, you know, we've got an outline document, we've got a deck, like sometimes it's a full pilot script, sometimes it's a couple of different scripts for a show. Sometimes what they're asking for is a kind of a market analysis of an idea, as in, where can we potentially sell this? Who are the right people targeting at this moment in time? Why does this idea work or potentially not work in the marketplace as things currently stand? So it varies a bit. It's always interesting to come in and sit down with a group of very creative people and try and figure out what it is that they want to do themselves, and which, because sometimes it feels a little bit like it's if you've got a number of like different projects on the slate, it's like, where should we be prioritizing? And they have their own instincts about that, but sometimes it's just somebody else coming in and sitting down and going, yeah, no, you're right, that is like maybe the best place to be focusing at the moment or whatever. And it like I don't really advertise this. Like I don't have a website. I'm not banging the drum or whatever, but it's kind of grown through word of mouth, where every year there's more and more people kind of looking to kind of so I guess if it's positive word of mouth, that's a good thing, you know.
Absolutely. So it really is then coming in and thinking of things in terms of getting the marketplace ready.
Partially that, also in terms of like one of the things that's happened to me over the years is like through various connections and knowing a lot of writers, both like in the US and here and whatever, like you get exposed to an awful lot of material. So I've read a huge volume of pilot scripts or treatments. I've seen a huge volume of decks. So you do start to build up a sense of like, what is a good way to sell or present an idea and what isn't. You know, in the current market, the market is always changing, and it's not like, I need to make this very clear. It's not like I'm ever telling people to chase the market in a regard, but if you're trying to get a project ready to present to market, it can be valuable knowledge to kind of have an understanding of who is actually looking for what at any given time, or more importantly, perhaps what they're not looking for, and potentially what's the best way to present it in a way that appeals to them most. And if you are able to decode network speak a little bit, it can be helpful, I guess.
Okay. I'm so interested in hearing how you got to this point, because I know you worked in camera department for a long time as well. If we were to rewind even before you were working in the camera department, where did your interest in this industry come from? And what was it that made you want to work in film and television?
I've been a real kind of film and TV obsessive for as long as I can remember, to be honest. Like at one point in time, I was going to the cinema every week, like every Friday. What almost whatever opened, like there was some educational value to be had from any kind of movie or whatever. And even in the early days, I was fascinated. I used to pick up Screen International and stuff and track the box office figures for everything, pre-internet as it was in those days. And then I went to DIT and I studied film production there, and that kind of started like an even deeper dive, because there were film theory classes that we did there, which was stuff I hadn't really been exposed to before, and like trying to think more critically about film as well as like how to load a magazine, because in those days it was actual film that we used to deal with. But then like when we got to DVDs and stuff, like it was like a godsend, because suddenly on top of being able to own a copy of a film that you really loved or were very interested in, there was all the additional content in terms of director's commentaries, making of, so, like that stuff was endlessly fascinating. So I always loved film and television, always from a very early age wanted to make. I mean, I was shooting short films myself, like very early days on Super 8, on video, whatever I could get a hold of at the time. They're all terrible. Only my closest friends have ever been allowed to watch them. But it was an exciting thing to be able to do at the time. And that, yeah, like that's never left me. It's funny, I remember being on a set once with, we were waiting for weather to change. So there's myself, the DP, and the director kind of huddle around the camera having a chat, whatever. And we ended up talking about film, and it became quite a deep dive for about 30 minutes or whatever. And he said to me, and he said, "It's so rare to meet crew who actually love film this much." And I was like, "Is it really?" That really kind of hadn't occurred to me before. I kind of thought everybody to an extent was in it because they kind of loved film. But actually, I guess it's not true. For some people, I guess it is. It's a job they're very good at. It's a job they enjoy, but they go home and do something else at the weekend or whatever. I go home and watch 4Ks.
It's a great
Pretty
way
sad.
to begin. And then when you were working in camera department, you worked on some massive films, Ordinary Decent Criminal, Reign of Fire, The Ringer, to name a few. How did camera department come to be where you kind of started your professional career?
When I was in DIT, like some of the core people that came in to work with us were people like Brendan Galvin, Donald Gilligan, God rest his soul. And I was personally quite interested in camera myself, like at that point in time. Whenever we would like do our short films or grad films, I would always want to be part of the camera team, kind of doing it if I possibly could. So when I left college and like tried to get work, it felt absolutely right to gravitate towards camera trainee, or trying to get any experience I could doing short films in camera department. Because it always felt like it's the one part of filmmaking that you can't do away with. You can basically lose everything else: light, sound, hair, makeup, everything. But you can't, if there isn't a camera capturing something, it isn't really a film, right? So it always feels like you're very much at the heart of what's happening, and you're witnessing that immediate translation between script, director, and actor a lot of the time, and it becomes like an absolutely fabulous film school. One of the best places that you can learn, because I would alternate between, say, directors doing their first time ever short film to then somebody hugely experienced like Rob Bowman or whatever coming in doing Rain of Fire or whatever. And you can learn as much from watching people make mistakes as you can from people like where you kind of go, that's absolutely a fantastic way to go about doing this, or this is a brilliant way to block something or to think about stuff or whatever. So it was fantastic kind of film skill in that way. And in those days especially, I'm sure it must be the same to some extent now or whatever, but there was real camaraderie in the camera department. Everybody kind of knew everybody. There was a lot of fun hanging out on the truck at the end of the day. You would work with a lot of the same people a lot of the time because, you know, if you were deemed kind of, you know, he'll show up on time, he'll do a good job, you know, he won't expose rushes on us, all that kind of stuff. You know, you could work pretty regularly, and I was lucky. I did a lot of work with James Mather over the years, brilliant Irish DP, and then with Dave Brennan and a few other people. So it was a great time, but it kind of got to a point where the part of me that had been making short films was still kind of hanging around a little bit. And like, as a DP, you're very creative. As a camera assistant, it's very technical. So the creativity part wasn't getting fed. And I kind of felt like I acquired a lot of useful knowledge that might actually give me an opportunity to actually give it a go. Because I didn't want to get to a point in time where, like, you know, you're in a retirement home, sitting down in your age, I wish I'd made a film, or I wish I'd, you know, I didn't want that. So when an opportunity presented itself, I took it.
Okay. So how did, or probably a better question is, where did the idea for Showrunners, your feature, then come from? What was the genesis of that particular project?
Okay, so going back to my obsession with commentaries, DVD extras, all that stuff, I was consuming dangerous quantities of American television at the time, primarily Lost, right? So we're talking at this point around, I suppose, 2008, 2009, and Lost was a really interesting example of a piece of television whereby it was the first real global phenomena breakthrough that had happened in a long, long time. And also it was a show that the fan base had become obsessed with the writing of the show as much as, or in some cases perhaps even more so than the actors on the show, which is normally the kind of point of entry for like fan base. ABC, which is the network that aired Lost at the time, like they faced a conundrum whereby when they were putting the actors out onto talk shows to talk about the show, they couldn't talk about the show because they had no idea what was going on. They had no idea where the story was going. So they switched to putting Damon Lindelof and Carlton Cuse out, who were the two showrunners at the time. And they were like a Laurel and Hardy team, like endlessly entertaining, riffing off each other, as well as spilling some tea from time to time. And that led to them doing their own series of podcasts and video casts, and then taking questions each week from viewers. And I submitted about 100 questions, I think. They answered one out of the ones that I submitted. But they fascinated me, and the work that they were doing fascinated me. So I started reading everything I could about showrunners in terms of books or online articles. Now, bear in mind, this is like 2009, 2010. There's not a huge amount of information compared to what there is today, you know, about that. And I went looking for the documentary that would explain to me what the job is, and I couldn't find it. So I did there was a program they used to run. I don't know if they still do it or not. It was in association with Screen Ireland. It was called the Engine Room, and it was like a 3-day event where you could go in with a documentary idea and develop it with everybody else that was in the room, as well as I can't remember the name of the woman who was running it. She came in from the UK. And then at the end of that, there was an opportunity to pitch to Screen Ireland, RTE, and TG Car. But it was kind of weird because you had to pitch in front of everybody else in the room. And my idea was not originally selected, but they had so I think there were 10 or 12 ideas, and then there was another 12 people that were kind of like the second tier, and you could watch the pitching, but not actually pitch yourselves. But then there was like a wild card where everybody else in the room voted on one additional person to pitch, and they voted on me. So I got an opportunity to pitch, and it was terrifying. Like the first time you've ever done it is in front of 24 people, and then all these people from these different organizations and broadcasters and stuff. But Alan Marr was the guy who was there from Screen Ireland representing at the time, and I could tell from the line of questioning that he took with me that he was interested in a way that it was obvious RT and TG Carr were not. So I followed up with him afterwards, and he asked me to come in for a meeting. And then at the end of that meeting, he kind of said to me, okay, put an official pitch together for it, and we'll get you some basic development money to try and see if you can actually make this happen, So that's kind of how that started.
Okay. It kind of sounds like a scaled up, higher stakes version of some of the film base programs that they used to run to win a little bit of money for short films. I don't think it's run anymore, but it sounds like a great program and so valuable to get that experience, as uncomfortable as it be, to
Yeah,
pitch.
no, it was like, and like there was a lot of good feedback from other people in the room as well. Like it was one of the things I do genuinely find, even from courses I've kind of run myself and stuff over the years, like I do find Irish creatives are generally quite supportive of other people, right? So if you've got a group of writers in the room, they're going to be supportive. If you've got a group of directors or producers in the room, they're generally going to be quite supportive. Where I've seen maybe in some other countries where it can be an exercise in undercutting or undermining a little bit, or it's kind of like there's a united goal and effort here to try and have as many people succeed as you can possibly accomplish, which is great. But yeah, I mean, it was, I think they gave me 10 grand, and it was kind of like, go to LA and see if you can get anybody on camera saying anything interesting. And off I went, naive little Des.
Okay. I just want to come back to what you said there about Irish creatives in a room being supportive. And I wonder whether that's one of the reasons why we perform so well on a global stage. Maybe there's something in that mindset of bolstering each other that has.
Yeah, no, for sure. I like, it's kind of that maybe it's that underdog thing a little bit. Like, I was reading, there's a couple of articles that came out in Deadline there towards the end of last week, like kind of talking, like really bigging up like where Irish film is at the moment and stuff. And, I think there's a quote from Ed Guiney where he's saying it's a 30-year overnight success that's kind of happening at the moment. But it does feel like, everybody's kind of mucked in to some extent to try and make that happen. And, hopefully going forward, there's going to be even more of this. Like, I mean, I think like, projects like Doppelgangers between McDara and Lee, fantastic. Alan and Killian doing big things, fantastic. I mean, I'd love to see more of this in terms of, places that newer, younger filmmakers, writers, TV makers can go, because there is something of a lack of that a little bit at the moment. But yeah, there definitely does seem to be, and I guess people are maybe feeling even more emboldened at the moment by the fact that like they are seeing, like, to slightly go off on a tangent for a second and stop me if this goes boring, but like one of the things I've kind of been saying to writers here for a while is like it's been very, and I can feel the palpable frustration from writers, Irish writers in this regard, that like opportunities to pitch and get your own show made are like, they're like gold dust, right? And there are so many hoops to go through, and we're at a disadvantage compared to the UK and the US, and there's no existing infrastructure for writers in this regard, right? But you're always looking for, okay, but where are the little successes that you can point to that kind of feel like, okay, maybe things are evolving and changing a little bit at the moment. And just the other day, I took a shot at the Netflix top 10 in Ireland had 3 Irish shows, inverted commas, 3 Irish shows in it. There was Bodkin, Kin, and Obituary. And then Bodkin hit number 5 on the Netflix global chart, which is 3 days viewing. And now it's in the US top 10 as of today as well. So while Bodkin isn't a fully Irish show, there is an awful lot of Irish talent involved in the making of it. So I'm going to claim it for the purposes of moving forward in this regard. But yeah, but it's like that hasn't happened before. So like you do feel some evolving happening, but it is like, if you compare the amount of Irish directors working at the highest level globally at the moment, DPs, a number of other heads of departments, crew are constantly working on some of the biggest shows in the world here all the time. It does feel like writers are the underserved element of that story at the moment. Now, I know Screen Ireland's focus is very much on writers going forward at the moment. I know what Element have been doing with Storyhouse is hugely writer focused, because everybody's aware that this is the missing piece a little bit at the moment. And it's like, okay, well, what can we do to, word du jour, elevate writing going forward to try and help more people break through. But it does feel like there is a significant desire to achieve that as well, you know?
Yeah, and it's vital, right? Is it Hitchcock who said you need three things to make a good movie: a good script, and a good script?
Yeah, well, it's the old adage. You can make a bad film from a good script, but you can't make a good film from a bad script,
Yeah,
right? And like it's very hard at the moment as well, because like if you're a writer here, you're no longer competing with just other writers here. You're competing with every other writer in the world, because it's a global business now, right? So it would be common for me to talk to writers, and they would express significant frustration at lack of opportunity, and also to some extent feeling that they're beholden to one or two genres and they can't really expand outside of that, because of the nature of what's being financed here, or what there is a possibility to get made here. And some people have frustration with that as well. So hopefully those things can change, because we can't just make crime dramas all the time, right? There has to be other options that we're offering. Like, one of the things I regularly do in talks is I compare the Netflix global chart for a week to the Irish top 10 for a week. It's always 50 to 60% identical. And then if you break that down into, well, what kind of stories like this are we providing for Irish audiences? Unfortunately, the answer 9 times out of 10 is none. And that makes it very, challenging to try and push writers out there who maybe are interested in working in other genres, where it is more challenging, but potentially, if you can move them into the right position on the map, there may actually be more opportunity. But this is just me. I don't run any of the agencies or guilds or whatever. So, but from the outside looking in, that's one of the places I think needs addressing.
I love the idea of comparing the global top 10 with the Irish top 10. Not something I've ever thought of doing, but I'm going to do that later today and see what it looks like. Really interesting. Thank you for that tip.
No worries.
If we loop back to that 10,000 or thereabouts development funding you got for Showrunners, had you been spending time in LA kind of prior to that? Did you have any footprint over there or in that industry before getting the opportunity to go over for the doc?
So I had holidayed in LA. I had friends who lived there. One of my friends, Lisa, ran the Los Angeles Irish Film Festival at the time over there. But I didn't really know anybody that was in industry, especially not in TV over there. So like when I first went over, I think it was around September 2010. This is a long way back, but and I had one meeting arranged in advance. I had hunted down Jane Espenson, who's a brilliant TV writer, who's written on nearly every hit show you can name over the last 30 years. I had convinced her to meet me for lunch in the sadly now gone ArcLight Cinema on Sunset Boulevard. But that meeting was kind of depressing for me, because as I explained to her what the ambition was, she proceeded to lay out all the reasons why that was never going to be possible to accomplish. And in fairness to her, every kind of roadblock or whatever that she mentioned, we absolutely hit along the way. But there is a thing about being younger, naiver, and full of kind of, well, I'll show you. So I kind of stuck with it. But I mean, I think it took me 3 months to get the first person on camera. Like, it was very challenging because, like, if you come over, like, I've no track record as a director. I'm a complete unknown over there. I'm cold calling people. I'm door stopping people at like writers events, trying to get a card from them. I'm trying to contact assistants. That's very challenging. Now, it got slightly easier after we got the first person on camera. Then at least you can kind of go, okay, the next time you're approaching somebody, this person has done it. And like, you can slowly kind of build that up. And then I had one of my friends in LA, Ryan Patrick McGuffey, he kind of came on board to kind of help me do it properly. And like, a problem shared is a problem halved a little bit as we went forward. But it wasn't until we got Damon Lindelof on camera that I really did think, okay, this is actually doable, you know. And when that interview was over, he sat down with us for half an hour afterwards and gave me a whole lot of advice about better ways to maybe be trying to approach this going forward. And so we actually took one of his key pieces of advice and it changed everything for us in the next block that we did.
How did you convince Damon? Because I think building access and building trust are very difficult things in making docs. And you're obviously reaching out to, someone at the height of their star. Can't imagine it was easy.
No, none of them were easy. Not until we got all the way to maybe towards the end on the other side. But Damon, we tried a couple of different approaches. I found out that a mutual friend of ours had worked with Damon before, and then Ryan, who's working with me, knew Damon's assistant a little bit, and we kind of approached from both those kind of angles a little bit to start off with. And then I think I might have had an email kind of conversation with them in advance as well to try and explain, because at that particular time as well, like, Lost had just finished and there had been a huge amount of hate for the finale of Lost. Maybe it was one of the first cancellations, that had been happening online, where, there was a lot of, and I was kind of like selling it on the point, like here's an opportunity maybe to try and help set the record straight a little bit about, from your point of view, like, what happened. So anyway, he agreed to do it, and we did it in his office, which was like a wonderland of Lost memorabilia. He actually had the hatch was a coffee table in his room, which he used to plank on, if people remember the plank thing though. Anyway, but yeah, and like, I think he had originally given us 30 minutes, and I think we filmed for 90, because as he got into the conversation, one of the things that a lot of the people that we filmed with first said to me as we recorded with them was, oh, hang on, you're asking me questions about me and what I do. You're not asking me questions about the show or the actors or like what's coming up this season, all the usual stuff they would be asked. In fact, the very first interview we did, the guy was so taken aback by the fact that I was interested in him and what he actually did, that when we finished the interview, he turned around at me and said, do you want to come in the writer's room? And I was like, can we bring cameras? And he was like, yeah, sure. And we went in and filmed in the writer's room then for an hour with those guys. Unfortunately, that footage isn't in the final film for various reasons. But it was like, again, that was an experience that kind of said to me, this is the approach. Like, it's like, if you make it about them, their point of view, their experiences, their, literally what the job is, because there was a significant amount of misunderstanding at that point in time about what the job really was. And yeah, from Damon on, we cut together a little kind of teaser piece of what we had at that point, and we released it just into the assistance network in LA. After that happened, then when I was still cold calling, I would start to describe who I was and what was going on, and people would go, "Oh, no, I've seen that. I know what that is." Okay, and that really helped.
In a sense, that almost acted like a sizzle that you released into the system.
Yeah, it really was a sizzle. I mean, it's what we showed Screen Ireland to kind of say, this is what we've gotten so far, and they liked it enough to kind of go, okay, here's well, right, we'll fully back this. And then, like I say, it made a huge difference. Like, because the assistance network is incredibly powerful in LA. They are the people who know everything that's going on, literally. And at one point in time, it's not active in the way that it used to be, but there used to be a Facebook group where every assistant on every show in LA was on there, and you could talk to people directly and kind of suss stuff out and whatever. And it was one of the other producers who came on board with us a little bit later on, Jimmy Noon in LA, who kind of got me introduced into that group, and they were like invaluable going forward. Like from that point, I always say if you can get the assistants on board, like that's 70% maybe of the battle, you know, because if they feel that like you're genuine and authentic about what you're doing. And the other thing I will say, and I say this to a lot of people here, is there is a kind of a graw for the Irish a little bit in certain creative elements in LA, in certain places, that I do think can be used to people's advantage a little bit. There were one of the first rooms we were in, one of the writers said to me, why does anybody in Ireland care about this? And I was like, well, you know, we watch American TV all the time. We love American TV. And he was like, really? And then he started telling me stories about the fact that his grandfather was from Cork originally. And, you know, and then that person ended up being very helpful to me in other regards going forward because of the Irish connection a little bit or whatever, you know.
Very valuable to know. I'm going to just jump backwards for a moment, just so we know something. You mentioned about Damon and coming off the back of Lost, and I think it's a great moment in the doc where he talks about having watched the Sopranos finale and loving it, and then speaking to people the next day and them saying it was a cop-out, and then realizing, oh, we're going to be slaughtered.
It's weird. Audiences have kind of gravitated into a position now where if you don't stick the landing, the whole show is condemned, which is weird because like if you've had 5 or 6 years of enjoyment across the run of a show, but you don't necessarily like the way it ends, does that destroy all of the other enjoyment that you had? I find it kind of weird a little bit. I can understand people being disappointed if it doesn't meet expectations, but like kind of writing off everything as a result of that seems a little strong. And also like a lot of the not to go super lofty here, but a lot of the criticism that they received was just nonsense. Like people were coming out going, oh, you know, I knew they were in purgatory the whole time. I'm like, they were never in purgatory. Like, did you watch the same episode? Like, it's not about purgatory. They all died. They all got off the island except Jack. You know, and people were kind of bashing the kind of religious kind of element it took at the end. And then I would remind people, you know, what's Jack's dad's name from the first episode in season 1 is Christian Shepherd. You know, like the whole thing was thought out from the beginning. Now they moved pieces around. They certainly changed things like based on audience reaction and so on. Like very famously, they introduced 2 new characters in season 3 that nobody had ever seen before and tried to push them into the foreground. Everybody hated them. They very quickly killed those off in response to that. But Damon will tell you like that last scene where Jack is basically looking over his own coffin and stuff in that room, that was there from the original kind of pitch thing with JJ. But like, you know, it's certainly I can understand at that time why he was like maybe quite upset about it, because there was a level of vitriol attached to that. I mean, I think it's calmed down a lot more these days. I think people are you know, retrospectively are a lot kinder to where the ending laid out. They're even doing an anniversary concert there in Hawaii next month with Michael Giacchino and a lot of the cast attending and stuff. So like thanks to streaming and so on, the show still lives on and is finding new audiences all the time. So I still think it's great. But I mean, he went on to do even better stuff with, you know, The Leftovers and Watchmen. So yeah, it didn't affect his career in any way, shape, or form.
With the doc, then obviously building access and trust was difficult. Were there other challenges then that you were encountering, kind of more logistical or challenges as a filmmaker and figuring out how the thing goes together? Maybe what was the post process like? Because I suppose that's the thing with a lot of documentary. Maybe you're finding what the film is as you make the film, or did you have some semblance of what you thought it would be structurally going into it?
So I guess it's a mix of both. I mean, I have to give a huge shout out to John Murphy, who was the editor on Showrunners, because the film certainly wouldn't be what it is without his contributions to it. There wasn't, one of the basic ideas from the beginning was to kind of, so at that time, like the most common way that people were consuming television was in 5-act structure, and I was like, can we mimic that with the doc? So we'll have effectively a teaser, we'll have an opening title sequence, and then we'll go into 4 acts and a closer, basically. And each of those acts will kind of deal with this specific kind of element of the show. We tried to make that work for a long time, and it just wouldn't really work. So what we kind of retained the kind of the chapterization idea, and we still have the kind of, you know, the cold open and the titles and stuff, but everything else kind of changed quite a bit as we went along. And yeah, it's a function of like what is the best storytelling, but it's also like what are the stories that you want to tell. I mean, when I met Matthew Carnahan for the first time, who is one of the loveliest people you'll ever meet, absolute gentleman of a guy. That was just at the point where they were doing the pilot for House of Lies, and I was like, oh my God, could we like maybe jump in and out of this over the course of a year, to the point where, you know, if the pilot got picked up, which we didn't even know at that point in time it would. And the fact that he agreed to that, and the fact that Showtime let us do all that stuff, is still kind of slightly amazing to me. But they did anyway. So we had that strand, and then when I first met Hart Hansen, it was like it was meant to be for a one-off interview, but we just got on really well, and he's again absolutely lovely man, very kind of gregarious kind of character, like considering the workload he was under at the time. And I just kind of pounced him when the interview was over, and I said, look, can we come back and do a day in the life of Hart Hansen, basically, like, you know, on the show. And then that took 6 months to negotiate with Fox, I think, back and forward. And then you know, Mike Royce, he was one of the very first people that we filmed with, and we just caught him at a moment in time where I kind of went, there's potentially an interesting story here. So if I've got a show that's beginning, I've got a hit show that's up and running, and then I've got a show that's in trouble, that maybe is kind of an interesting kind of structure in terms of, you know, all the different places you can find yourself on the spectrum. So, you know, can we do more with all of these guys? And they very kindly all agreed to let us do more. In fact, I remember the last time that we filmed with Mike for Showrunners, it was maybe 18 months after the first time we filmed with him. And he sat down for the interview and he said, what's this one for? And I said, no, it's still Showrunners. And he was like, really? Like, he was like, what the fuck is going on? I was like, you know, it's I just need this. Like, we've been editing, and I need this bit from you to kind of cap your story, like, you know. And he said, oh, okay. But yeah, it's like I say, John Murphy was incredibly helpful. I mean, we did it. There were so many cuts, man. I mean, Jesus, I think at one point we screened, just for friends in LA to kind of get feedback, I think we screened a 3-hour, 15-minute cut of Showrunners,
Well,
which is insane. You know, it's like, it's insane.
it's a
So
four
trying to
part.
get that down to like 90, we got it down to 150 easily enough. The last 20 minutes though was like, you know, but yeah, so thankfully after all that, people seem to like it.
Isn't it's a great film. It's a great resource. As I had mentioned to you when Julie Ryan was on, who did clearances. Julie,
Yeah.
I always ask, and I will ask you at the end, about kind of any big recommended resources or reads. And Julie recommended Showrunners,
Well,
because
that's very kind of Julie, and Julie like was a real help to us as well, because like the clearances thing on that was insane. Like because we'd filmed with so many people, and all of the people that we'd filmed with had worked on multiple shows, and we were kind of touching on it. It turned into like, we had to deal with basically every network, every studio, so many agents and managers, and that whole thing took a year just to do that. Which really pisses me off now, because now I see so many of these docs that are kind of in a similar space, and they're all doing fair usage. They're just sticking this thing up at the end, and they're using all like whatever footage they want, and they seem to be able to get away with it. And I'm like, really? Because like we had lawyers from ABC and stuff threatening to sue us and stuff at one point if we used stuff that they didn't approve. And in fact, I made a really like first timer error. Maybe this is worth mentioning briefly. So never shoot an interview in a room that's covered in advertising material that you do not have cleared in advance. I did that with one of the interviews that we did with Jane Espenson, and the option I was left with at the end, because the network wouldn't clear anything for us, was to either cut all of that out or rebuild the room around her in 3D. And we rebuilt the room around her in 3D, which was a very expensive proposition to do. So I won't. That's a mistake I won't ever make again. I promise, John. I promise. Sorry, shout out to John Wallace, who produced Showrunners and went through hell with me for 4 years.
I had John on as well, actually. Spoke to him a couple of weeks ago. Touched on
All
it.
right. He's a good man, John Wallace.
Yeah, made some great work. Showrunner seems to have been a very pivotal moment in your career, in kind of catapulting you to where you are now and the work you do now. So this may be somewhat of a redundant question, but I was going to ask, how did that film, after its release, impact and change the work you were doing and your position within the broader industry?
Well, the truth is it didn't really, to begin with. We had an amazing kind of launch in the US. I mean the American TV, it's the Television Academy. Sorry, Television Academy. They had hosted the LA premiere. We did a huge red carpet event. We had about 7 or 8 of the showrunners come down to do a piece afterwards, which is still available on the Television Academy website, I think. And then we got loads of press. We had a sold out run. We did SAG screenings. We did WJW screenings, everything. Like, it was amazing. And then at the same time, we were slowly trying to set up the next project, which was going to be a documentary about film composers. And we had met and had dinner with Bear McCreary, and we were approaching Thomas Newman and a couple of other people. And then shortly after I came back, my mum got very sick with cancer. And then the diagnosis shifted to terminal. And I just made the decision that I wasn't going to do anything else. I was going to stay and kind of, family first. There's more important stuff at that point in time. After she passed, it was kind of like anybody in that situation, you're trying to readjust and trying to like find gravity again in some way. And I initially thought I wanted to jump back into doing something big again, but actually people around me talked me out of that very wisely. And I ended up taking a meeting with, I think it was Grania Bennett from Screen Ireland, and maybe Alan from Filmbase at the time as well. And they were asking about, was there a possibility of getting showrunners to come to Dublin, to maybe work with writers here. And that idea was kind of intriguing. And I reached out to Matthew Carnan, because he'd already come over on a holiday with his family earlier on at that point. And he's a lot of ties to Ireland and really loves Ireland and stuff. So he agreed to do it and come over. And that was really, really great room for a couple of days. And the reaction to that was so positive that they asked if we could do it again. I got Matthew to come back over again. And then that led to the second time we did it, they asked me, would I do a preface day to it, where I kind of set up state of the US industry for US writers a little bit at that point in time. And I did that. And whatever feedback they got from that, they approached me later and said, would you do that as a standalone kind of thing for writers? And we set it up for a day. And then I think I ended up having to do 3 or 4 days in a row, because there was so much interest in doing it. which was terrifying because I'd never taught that much before in my life. And by the middle of day 3, my voice was actually going. It was like embarrassing. That other stuff has kind of grown from there. It's like, Granny's been a brilliant kind of person to work with in Screen Ireland because she's very focused on the creative skills end of stuff in there in terms of training, and is very focused on trying to help writers and develop writers. So I started pitching her ideas for stuff that I thought might be helpful and interesting, and that's where the pitching program that I do originated from. That's where the LA Writers placements originated from. And like I said from earlier on, that's where the other stuff then kind of started to develop out of, because some of the people that would do those courses with me were producers or directors or devs at different companies who would want to follow up on various points that were raised or whatever. And so that whole thing kind of grew out of one event nearly in a weird kind of a way. And then like it kind of became more obvious to me that, there is maybe a bridge that can be built here a little bit to try and connect Dublin to LA in regards to writing for television specifically, because it's not working really going through the UK unless people are willing to go over there, move and live their whole lives there. Like, just on a side note as well, somewhere towards the end of 2015, I think maybe start of 2016, I got contacted by a bunch of filmmakers out of the US who said they had taken up the mantle and were doing a documentary about film composers, but they thanked me for, inspiration and whatever. They were kind of quoting Showrunners as a model for kind of what they were going to do. And then that film actually came out in 2017. It's called Score, a music documentary, I think, which did quite well for them as well. So, that it did materialize in another way. It doesn't really have any direct involvement for me at that point in time. But go check out Score.
Well, it may not have existed had Showrunners not existed. So,
well, yeah. Well, thank you. That's very kind. Somebody was saying to me there recently, it's like there's almost a whole new subgenre of documentary that's kind of happening now, which is, not I don't want to use the word fan based, but it's like independently financed. A lot of it is Kickstarter driven or whatever, where people are exploring areas of the arts that, like, this stuff wasn't, like, it might have been done as a PBS documentary before, but like, one of the, I remember having multiple conversations with people from RT originally about Showrunners, and they're like, too niche, too niche, too niche. But something's maybe niche if you're looking at a big audience, but there's a big enough niche worldwide potentially to make it actually worthwhile doing this kind of stuff. Like, and that there certainly is, there's a UK based company called Creator VC. I don't know if you're familiar with them. And they've like now at the point where every Kickstarter they do raises about 1 million or 2 million for all the docs they do. But it's all very kind of film focused. It's like exploring horror films of the 80s or science fiction films of the 80s, or they're doing a whole one about aliens at the moment called Aliens Expanded. And you can look at that and go, well, that's super niche. Like what broadcaster would back that? But like, they just raised £1 million to do it. So there's somebody out there who's interested,
definitely. It's almost like IP that isn't IP, but it's so niche that an audience, as you said, exists.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of audiences out there for stuff like that, like, and it's marketplace is more challenging than ever or whatever at the moment, and people are constantly looking for a reason to say yes to something. Like, it's part of why, existing IP carries so much value at the moment. It's like, okay, well, we can point to that, and there's some parameters around, and there's some data around it that can help us make a decision. But if you've got pre-existing fan bases that are massively engaged as well, that's also potentially like a helpful piece of data, and points to, a potential engagement that may well be enough to actually justify like the cost of making something and doing business in that regard. Now, obviously, fandom has become a very difficult place these days because it's become quite schismed, and people have kind of gone into their culture war corners in relation to certain materials and stuff. But I think there's still core stuff that, like, people just love. Like, there's an explosion in music doc going on at the moment across all the streamers. Apple are doing a lot of it. Prime are doing some, want to do more. Netflix are doing some, want to do more. I mean, those are the kind of stories that I'm most fascinated in telling, is kind of the creative kind of based, arts based kind of stuff. And like the two ideas we've been pitching recently are both kind of in that kind of zone and stuff as well.
Do you think that there is an equivalent for fiction that isn't massive IP?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. It's harder because, you know, there's so much noise to try and cut through. Like it's not even just that you're competing with everything else that's on television. It's that you're competing with video games, social media, TikTok, everything else. Like the attention economy is a very crowded marketplace, like at the moment, you know. And like sometimes, especially at the moment where like, you know, everybody's dialing back on the amount of money they're spending, on the amount of shows they're ordering. We're kind of in the new the streaming 2.0 era a little bit at the moment. One of the most common mantras that you'll hear out of LA at the moment is just survive till 25. I'm not even sure everybody will. Paramount's on up for sale at the moment. We'll see what happens there. But I mean, Bodkin is a Netflix show, but it's not existing IP, right? I think existing IP is kind of moving into a position to try and perform in a similar way to what's kind of happening with theatrical exhibition. So, Rings of Power, Wheel of Time, Game of Thrones, those shows are destination assets for the networks that are using them. In other words, they're shows that can drive subscription and drive engagement, right? But there has to be space for the smaller stuff as well. Like I don't know if you watch Ripley on Netflix, right? I thought that was a masterclass. Definitely, like from a director's point of view, definitely watch it because it's stunningly put together, and I think it's the best performance Andrew Scott's ever given. So I hope there's more of it. But like technically, that's IP, but it's not IP that like people will be overly familiar with. It's not like what I would call kind of brand name IP or brand recognition IP. And also, it was so distressing. I had a conversation there a while ago with some younger folk, who wouldn't watch it because it was in black and white,
Oh,
and they were like, "Yeah, no, that's old." And I'm like, "Oh my god, that's depressing." If that's hopefully that's not a widespread mindset, but we'll see. But yeah, but like I mean, there's all different ways of exploiting IP. Like one of the biggest shows on Netflix is Outer Banks. I don't know if you've ever watched that. It's going into its fourth season, but it's absolutely exploded on there. But it was part original idea mixed with a book that had been written by a local teacher from North Carolina, which is where the show is set. So they took some elements from that book that no one had ever heard of, almost completely forgotten. It was published years before the show came out, plus their own original ideas, and kind of put that into a kind of a zeitgeisty mix. Beautiful young cast, beautiful settings. It's kind of, for anyone who hasn't seen the show, it's kind of like a cross between National Treasure and Dawson's Creek a little bit. That wasn't brand recognition IP when they pushed that show out there. They just marketed it really well, and it caught on to something. I mean, it's a very good show for what it is, right? And I'm like, I say to writers all the time here, why isn't there an Irish Outer Banks? I'm like, I feel like that's something that you could really make work here, right? We've got amazingly talented wave of new, younger Irish actors. There are amazing places that you could set a story in terms of visual backdrop for it, right? And like that YA kind of element, I like it doesn't seem to be the focus for a lot of companies or producers here, and I don't quite understand why that is. Now you can certainly you can make the argument that the most successful YA stuff is high profile IP like Samurai Turn Pretty or whatever, but I'm going to counter that with Outer Banks being an example of a different approach that you can take that might also work. And like, I don't know if you could make the argument that Normal People begins as a YA show and then, you know, grows up a little bit as it goes along. But Normal People is still maybe the biggest noise that any Irish show has had, like up to this point, like still. So maybe there's something in that we're not like fully exploring, you know?
yeah, very interesting. The interesting way of thinking of Normal People as well as kind of potentially beginning as YA and growing up over the course of those 12 acts.
I say to people here, when you get to the point where there's an Instagram account for Connell's necklace, then that's when you know, like, you've really kind of hit some pop culture kind of moment. Like, you know, okay, Conversations with Friends wasn't as successful, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try again in that space. Like, you know, again, like everything, it comes down to the writing. But I do know a couple of people here who'd love to take a bite at that particular apple. if
Yeah.
anybody was on for giving it a go, you know.
Yeah. You mentioned two things. One was the just survive till 2025.
Yeah.
I have heard that resonating around. I'm in the UK at the moment, and it's been banging around over here as well. On the one hand, it's terrifying, but on the other, you're like, it's also light at the end of the tunnel, I suppose.
Yeah.
And you mentioned streaming 2.0. And I was wondering, and maybe you've touched on this already, but with streaming now kind of beginning to look more like a version of network television with advertising and going back to that more traditional, I suppose, TV paradigm, how do you think that that is going to impact, or how do you see it impacting how shows are being bought and the opportunities or lack thereof that that will leave for writers?
There's a weird dichotomy with streaming that sometimes people, I think, aren't that aware of, because all the focus is on kind of the noisy and the new. But consistently, the most watched programming on all of the streamers across the board is legacy programming. It's acquired programming. It's Gilmore Girls. It's Suits. Kind of throwback television to a certain degree, you know. And one of the things that, like, from Netflix's point of view anyway, certainly they would be quite open to anything that's in that space at the moment, a little bit, you know, because it's kind of like comfort food TV. Like, you know, I think audiences are in a place very much at the moment where they're like, you know, you take one look at the news and it's like endlessly depressing about what's going on in the world around you at the moment. So it's like, okay, that's not necessarily what I want to be watching, you know. So give me something that is entertaining. So sometimes people feel like entertainment is a bad word to use in relation to creative work, and I'm like, why? It's a wonderful thing to be able to do, is to entertain an audience, right? There doesn't have to be a message to everything. There doesn't have to be, you know, something can exist purely to entertain with nothing beyond that. And it's equally, as far as I'm concerned, it's equally as valid as something that's saying something incredibly profound about the world that we live in right now, right? And there's an audience for both types of content. I think one is underserved from the Irish end of things at the moment a little bit. And that's why in a lot of places they're going elsewhere to try and find that content rather than from local broadcasters and stuff like that. But in terms of streaming trouble, like there is some opportunity though that I think Ireland has that, like, is kind of, so one of the big things about streaming 2.0 is all of the costs requirements coming down, right? Everybody's trying to do everything for cheaper because it's no longer about subscriber numbers. It's about how fast can we get to profitability, how much money can we make to return to shareholders, and so on. So in that regard, Irish producers and production companies are very used to doing things at certain numbers and making that look far better than the number they're actually given to work with. I think that's going to be potentially a valuable skill set going forward. I think the days of streamers being as profligate as they were like 3 or 4 years ago is gone forever. Unfortunately, we missed that gravy train other than in terms of inward production. But anyway, I do think that presents some opportunity. Something like Obituary, I think, is a good example of like where you can potentially go. Like, it's an original idea. It's all set in Donegal. It's an entirely Irish cast. It's one Irish writer writing the whole show at the moment, and Kin as well. Like, I mean, the Kin has been so phenomenally successful. The fact that, like, it went to BBC and found a massive audience in the UK, the fact that, like, ITV's response to that was to go back and buy all 5 seasons of Love Hate to put on ITVX so that they had their Irish crime drama as well. The fact that Kin is now exposed to an even bigger audience again on Netflix really hopes to me that, like, there's a way that they can find to like do season 3 of that show. Like, you know, I think Kieran Donnelly and Peter McKenna have done a fantastic job with Kin, right? And the whole cast, everybody involved with that show has done a fantastic job. So, but again, it's like, okay, so that's a crime drama, and then we've got a dark comic, crimey drama. What are we doing in the other spaces where we aren't at all, right? So like in feature film, horror, Irish horror is having a bit of a boom moment. Where's TV horror? Where's YA TV? Where's straight comedy TV outside of the young offenders? Dare I say it, where's science fiction? Um, sometimes I get a feeling that some people here think that science fiction is like, well, we can't do alien invasions and this and that. And I'm like, but look at Dark, right? Or like high concept, small scale science fiction can be just as involving. Like Dark Matter that's on Apple TV Plus at the moment. I don't know if you've seen any of that. Again, it's something that's totally concept driven. It does a great cast. It's like Jennifer Connelly and Joel Edgerton and stuff and whatever. But it's concept driven, and I think we could do that quite well, right? The challenge maybe is in finding writers that and producers who feel confident developing material in that space, like. But they are out there, and like there's an unexplored area of Irish writers in terms of who are writing for comic books and video games, where there could be some crossover that's happening that isn't happening. And I don't understand why it isn't happening. It'd be where I would start if I had my own production company, to be honest with you.
Very interesting. I wonder whether that might be one of the next spotlight schemes that Screen Ireland run to try and bring talent from those pools into writing for the screen.
Yeah, I mean it's I mean, like, you've got like people like Declan Shalvey and Michael Carroll and Will Sliney, and I think based on speaking to some of them, they would all love an opportunity to kind of go in and translate some of their work into like live action, is it potentially more expensive to be doing? Yes. Does this feel like something that you can't do without a streamer? Maybe, but I mean, like, the co-production model seems to be really back and kicking in a significant way, even to the point where like a lot of the streamers, especially in the European market, seem far more open to co-production again, like as a viable way of going forward. So I don't understand the reticence. Now, I have to caveat that and say I am aware of one or two companies here who are developing material in that space, but nothing has gotten across the finish line that I'm aware of, like, yet. So maybe Doppelgangers can accomplish that because of the first line or the first look deal they have with New Line, which I think includes TV as well as theatrical. Killian has had a great deal of success with science fiction movies over the years. Maybe his company might be open to doing something in that space as well. Maybe not. But it would be great if there were opportunities for writers here to feel they could venture outside of crime, family drama, addiction story. I'm not knocking those genres. They're like eternally popular kind of stuff. But there's other stuff that is eternally popular. And if you look at the top 10 charts of every streamer in the world, it's populated with more of this stuff that we don't do than it is with the stuff that we do.
Yeah. When you are talking to and working with maybe writers and companies now, we've kind of touched on some of the opportunities that you can see in the marketplace. But if there was one piece of advice maybe you had for writers trying to break in or get someone to read material, what would that be?
I think especially for younger writers and people who maybe haven't done that much, it's the don't self-edit at the beginning, right? There's a group of writers, I think it was, well, maybe a year ago, maybe a little bit more. And they were talking to me about how they were aware if they were writing something and trying to get it made here, that it's like, they might start off with like night exterior car chase through streets of Dublin. And then they stop themselves and go, oh my God, this is insanely expensive. Okay, interior bar conversation. And I'm like, don't do that at the beginning. Write it, blue sky it, whatever way you want to, and show off what you can do as a writer. If someone comes in and options it, or you start getting into conversations with producers, that's the point in time where people will start having conversations about what's potentially achievable, not achievable, and so on. But don't self-edit at the start. Be ambitious on the page, right? Show off a little bit on the page, like, because I don't know if you find this, but like it can get. I did a thing with a group of writers there just last week where one of the things I asked them not to do was a story about a young Garda sent from Dublin to a small Garda station down the country who stumbles into like, you know, drugs or cults or something, because if I read one more of those, I'm going to put a gun in my mouth, right? Um, so it's like, do something unexpected, do something fresh, do something that's like attention grabbing. Do you remember Queeby? That short-lived little streaming
Oh,
thing that was on your phone. And anyway, shortly around the time that that started, there was a spec script that I think it sold for like 2 million bucks or something, that came out of the US that everybody was raving about, and it was a story about a three-way relationship where it was a famous actor, his girlfriend who wants to be a writer, and the guy's sex doll. And the sex doll comes alive and has conversations with the other girl, and like the two of them get into this war over the guy. And I'm like, I've never seen or heard anything like that before. If you can accomplish that with a script and it's good, that's a fantastic place to start. I'm not remotely saying that's easy to do. But even if it's a spin or a take that hasn't been seen before, like, you know, like one of the things I would say a lot to people is like, what's the USP of this, right? What is the unique selling point? Because there's now so much. I hate using the word content, but there's so much material out there. Like even like execs will tell you, or devs will tell you, like a lot of them, especially in the US, are at a point now where if the log line doesn't engage, I'm not reading, because there's 100 more. So killer log lines are really important right now as well. A killer deck that actually like really does effectively translate, and then the script. But like it starts with the script and then work backwards from there, right? Most of the time. So yeah, those are the things. Blue sky, USP, do something different. Even if it's a familiar genre, what are you doing that's different with it?
I have just a tiny little post that I keep up when I do work, and it just says surprise me. And it's
Yeah,
just try and remind myself to not go where do something
yeah,
that surprises me.
because at this point in time, audiences have consumed so much TV and film that they're pretty smart. They're pretty aware of kind of the beats and the tropes, right? So like if they're already ahead of you, you've kind of lost a little bit, like, you know. So like that's one of the reasons that I think those Harlan Coben shows are doing so well at the moment. It's like because you're constantly trying to wrong foot the audience, right? It's constant rug pulling that's going on, and we keep snapping it up each time. And you know, unfortunately, that's partly maybe like, you know, the boredom threshold has really increased for audiences because of their, you know, the way people interact with social media at this point in time. But it is good to try and keep audiences on their feet and surprising them, rather than kind of feeling like, you know, where this started in episode one, where it finishes in episode six. I could have told you that halfway through episode one. That is not the place that you want to be, you know.
Yep. Are there any then recommended books or other resources that you have encountered throughout your career that have had profound or big impact on your work?
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of them. Two of the more recent ones I think that I thought were really good were, there's a book written by Jeff Melvoin, who Jeff was in Showrunners as well, but he sits on the Mount Olympus of showrunning in the US. Jeff designed the Showrunners training program that the Writers Guild of America uses. There isn't anything he doesn't know about writing and producing television. But he's got a new book out. I think it's called How to Run a Hit TV Show by Jeff Melvoin, something along those lines. But it's part autobiography, but all of the autobiographical stories are interspersed with his experience on what show was he working on at that particular point in time. It's entertaining and educational at the same time.
I
Emmanuel Oberg's recent book as well about writing successful TV series, I would highly recommend that as well.
Amazing. I actually had the pleasure of doing a course with Jeff recently through Screen Ireland's
Right. He's
Accelerator.
doing the media exchange. Yeah.
Yeah, and brilliant, incredibly insightful. And I have the book on the shelf. I've yet to get to it, but I will.
Well, it's a good read. I think you'll enjoy it. And yeah, like he is, you know, as well as being like really, really lovely guy as well, and a mean guitar player. Like I say, I just find like his breadth of knowledge is extraordinary, and like he's pretty much worked with everybody at some level nearly at this stage, like, because he's been across so many different TV shows over the years. So yeah, it's that book, or any interaction that you can find with Jeff is gonna be fantastically useful as well. And then like there are a couple of books like it depends on I guess what areas of the business you're more interested in. But Bob Iger's book about running Disney is kind of interesting from a kind of a strategy point of view, and trying to think about it, look at the industry from a producer's point of view a little bit more, which, sometimes as writers and directors, that's not what you're doing, but it can be a useful exercise to try and get into that headspace, I think, sometimes a little bit. But yeah, it's oh, and there's a Showrunners book as well, if people want to
And
want to read that,
the
by
film.
Tara Bennett.
Can you talk about anything that you're working on at the moment, or what's next for Des Doyle?
We have been working with a production company in LA for the last while to bring 2 shows to market over there. We're in the middle of that process at the moment. We have picked possibly the worst time in the world to be pitching a show in that market, or shows in that marketplace, but we'll see where that ends up. I am working with Screen Ireland on 2 different things at the moment, one of which is something we've never done before, and one of which is the hopeful return of something we were doing that was immensely popular that we had to stop doing because of the pandemic. I'm sorry, I can't be more specific about any of this stuff. And
That's okay.
then 2 of the writers that I've been working with over the last while have both sold the projects that they were working on, which is fantastic because it's been a long road, and they're both, I think they're both exceptionally good pieces. The reaction to them has been fantastic. So like, that's rewarding for me as well, to kind of feel like, because one of the things I have done a little bit as well is present companies here with work from writers that I've worked with. I do it rarely, so when I do it, the companies do very kindly take the time and interest to read it. I hopefully on the basis that I'm never going to send them something that's not worth their while reading. And like, there are 1 or 2 newer writers that are coming into that kind of position with me as well, going forward as well. So there's some of that, but like, and some of the stuff that I'm hoping to do with Screen Ireland as well. But I'm really hoping that we can get one of the projects across the line to actually kind of be making something again at this point in time, because I enjoy everything else that I'm doing, but I do really want to make something new. Although I might have to wait till 2025 at this stage, like everybody else.
Hey, sure, look, we're nearly halfway through 2024 now,
There
so
you go. There you go. Yeah.
so we're on the path to 2025 and everyone having work again.
And like I say, the vast majority of people that I've gotten to the opportunity to work with over the past couple of years have been all like so incredibly supportive and helpful, and it is I do think that is a little bit unique in the industry here, because like, I would have, not all of my experiences in LA have been as positive. Now I need to caveat that and say, the core group of people that I regularly work with in LA, like Ryan, Jimmy Noon, Jason Rose, amazing people, super talented, wonderful people. But there are other people over there that have, it's certainly been challenging to deal with. Whereas here, for the most part, it does feel like everybody's kind of trying to move the whole ship forward in the right direction as best they can. So hopefully that continues, and I'm happy to do whatever little part I have with the little oar at the back that they've given me to row.
I have to say I agree 100%. My experience of the industry in Ireland is predominantly incredibly generous. People are very kind with their time and sharing and giving people a leg up, which is brilliant.
Like even the mentor scheme thing that like Screen Ireland run is fantastic to kind of have people like that to kind of, and like I know in a lot of cases, like even after that has expired, people are still open to like, you know, being helpful and advice and stuff. Like if you're going in cold and there's no one around you to help or offer advice or whatever, it's almost impossible, you know, to kind of get anywhere. Like, I mean, there are people that gave me breaks. There are people that helped me all along the way. There are showrunners who are incredibly kind to me and have helped me and continue to do so to this day, you know. Miles Miller and Al Goff, who are shooting Wednesday here at the moment, incredibly kind to me last year on something. Like, so it's generally speaking, I think it's, you know, I'd rather be doing this than like, you know, working for Meta or Google or something, you know.
Yeah.
Don't hate me, Meta and Google.
I am very excited for the writers you've been working with and the projects that you have moving. And I have all my fingers crossed that they all move in the right direction, which I'm sure they will.
Thanks.
I would like to just say thank you so much for talking to me, sharing so much, and giving me some great tips on looking at those charts and seeing what's being watched globally and what we're not making, and where we can kind of look for opportunities. So thank you, Des.
No worries, and thank you again for asking me. It's there was a period of time where I was doing a lot of podcasts in terms of promoting showrunners and stuff, whatever, and I made the mistake of complaining to a showrunner about it. I was like, I keep saying the same things over again. I'm kind of tired of it, like, you know. And they said, never be tired of people being interested in you enough to listen to you talk it. And I'm like, that has stuck with me ever since. And I'm like, so, you know, I'm very appreciative if anybody has listened to this all the way through, God bless you. But yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. It's nice to kind of riff with fellow creatives and stuff. And hopefully a year from now, we'll be talking about the shows we're making.
Yes, absolutely. I can't wait.
Yeah.
Back on.
All right.
For an exclusive.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Thanks a million again. And thank you to everyone who's been kind and helped me out along the way. I appreciate it.
And that's a wrap on Des Doyle. Thank you for listening to the Filmmaker's Playbook. If you're enjoying the show, please share it with a friend and follow and rate us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you have feedback, questions, or topics you'd like me to cover on the show, please put them in the comments section on our Instagram page at the Filmmaker's Playbook Podcast. You can follow me on Instagram at Jason Branagan Director, and you can follow Des on Instagram at Des Doyle Films. Links and social media handles are in the show notes. Join me next week when I talk to writer and actor Jay Jordan. Until next time.